Welcome back, mathematicians. We are going to look at multiplication in algebra today, but there are a few things we need to revise. The first one, the laws of exponents. If we multiply powers with the same base, we write down the base and add the exponents. We're now beginning to apply the things that you learned. Another thing we have to make use of is the distributive law. So one way to remember that is the one outside the room, which is the 2, shakes hands with everybody in the room. Right, what do I mean by that? Okay, so what we're going to say, and remember, we have an invisible multiplication sign there. So it means 2 multiplied by the bracket. So now there are two ways of looking at this. So we could say 2, 3 plus 4 is 7. So 2 times 7 is 14. Or I could use the laws of distribution and I can say 2 times 3 is 6. Plus, I copy down my sign, plus 2 multiplied by 4 is 8. 6 plus 8 is 14. So from this you can see that if we do it this way, simplify first and then multiply, we get the same as if we distribute and then add. Now why do we need this in algebra? Well, if you have a look at this expression, you can see that you cannot simplify what is in the bracket because they are not like terms. So when we have a question like that, we've got to do distribution. So the one outside shakes hands with everybody inside. So this is the same as saying A multiplied by B. Now a plus multiplied by a plus will give me a plus. A multiplied by C. So that is going to be A multiplied by C. So the answer here would be AB when I simplify plus AC. Let's have a look at the worked examples. Right, when we were working with integers, remember I said to you that we would eventually look at the signs and the letters variable when doing our signs, numbers, letters, or variables. Okay, so we're going to have a look at that. And for this example, I've got a negative multiplied by a positive. So my signs are going to be negative, or my sign is going to be negative. So I've done the signs. I now look at the numbers. So 5 multiplied by 3 is 15. Letters, I only have a P, so the answer to that is negative 15p. So in essence, that's what I did. The first thing I did was determine what my resulting sign would be. Then I multiplied the numbers and then I dealt with the variable. Let's have a look at this one. First of all, we check how many terms do I have. Well, I actually only have 3 terms because this is not minus, it just means we have a negative term and a negative term. So I have 1 term there. So as soon as I have 1 term, I must simplify. So I'm going to look at signs, numbers, and letters or variables. So if I look at the signs, I have a positive multiplied by a negative multiplied by a negative. So an even number of negatives will give me a positive. So now I've dealt with the signs. Now I look at my numbers. 3 multiplied by 2 is 6. 6 multiplied by 5 is 30. Now I deal with my variables. I'm multiplying, so I put them all down and I apply the laws of exponents. So here I have an m squared, there I have an m, there I have an m cubed. So the laws of exponents say when multiplying powers with the same base, write down the base and add the exponents. So here I've got 2 plus 1 plus 3. So 2 and 1 is 3 plus 3 is 6. Now I look at my n variable. There's an n, there's an n, there's an n. When I multiply powers with the same base, I write down the base, which is n, and I add the exponent. So I'm going to say 3 plus 2 is 5, plus 1 is 6. So that will be n to the 6. And a better way of writing that is 30 m to the 6 n to the 6. I can only do this when I multiply. In other words, when I have one term. I simplify like that. So again, the first thing we did was we looked at the signs. Okay, the two negatives made it a positive, and a positive times a positive is positive. Then I multiplied the numbers together. 3 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 5. And then I multiply the variables using the laws of exponents. Write down the base and add exponents. Let's look at the next one. This, the one outside, you've got to learn to recognize the one outside has got to shake hands with each one inside the room. So that is the first thing I'm going to do. And again, I must apply signs, numbers, letters, or variables. So the first thing I'm going to look at are my signs. A positive multiplied by a positive will give me a positive. Here I have an invisible 1. So 2 multiplied by 1 is 2. If I say a multiplied by a squared, I am multiplying. So I write down my base and I add exponents. 1 plus 2 is 3. The 2a is also distributed to positive 3. So I deal with my signs first. A positive multiplied by a positive is positive. Numbers, 2 multiplied by 3 is 6. My letters or variables, I just have an a, so that is a like that. And a better way of writing that is 2a cubed plus 6a. I check to see that these are not like terms. They are not, so I cannot simplify that binomial, 2 terms. It's a binomial. That is the answer. Why are the results added together? Because I had the terms added together when I started. So that's why they added together. Let's look at the next one. How many terms do I have? Well, in actual fact, I only have one term because these terms are inside the bracket, and that is multiplied to 3q. So I only have one term. And the one outside, remember, invisible multiplication sign there. So the one outside is distributed to all the terms inside the bracket. And if I have 3 terms inside the bracket, my answer must have 3 terms. So I'm going to say 3q multiplied by 2q squared. So it's 3q multiplied by 2q squared. Again, I'm going to look at my signs, numbers, and letters. So I have a positive multiplied by a positive, so it's going to stay positive, and I don't I don't need to write the plus sign there. Okay, so 3 multiplied by 2 will give me 6. I then multiply my variables. There's a Q and a Q. So I write down my base. The variables are the same. So when I multiply powers with the same base, I add the exponents. 1 plus 2 is 3. I then distribute the 3Q to the negative Q. And again, I do signs, numbers, letters. So I have a positive multiplied by a negative, so it becomes negative. 3 times invisible 1, so 3 times 1 is 3. I have a Q multiplied by a Q. Write down my base and add exponents. 1 plus 1 is 2, so it's 2Q squared. Now the last one, for my third term, I'm going to say 3Q multiplied by positive 6. A positive multiplied by a positive will give a positive result. I now do the numbers. 3 times 6 is 18. And all I have is a Q. You see, I have 3 terms in my answer. And that is the final answer. Remember, there are a few things to remember. The 3Q is distributed to each term inside the bracket. Remember the order. We do the signs first for each of the 3 times you do it, then the numbers, then the variables. When we get to the answer, check that there are no like terms. And remember, when we do distribution, as I'm distributing, I make sure I do not include the brackets. Let's test your understanding. How well did you understand this section? Okay, you can see this is distribution because I have the one outside must shake hands with everyone inside. So I'm going to multiply those two together. Remember, signs, numbers, letters. A positive multiplied by a positive is positive, but do I need to have that positive? Okay, so here I'm going to say, when I multiply, so this is what I'm actually doing, A multiplied, pardon me, so it's A squared B, and I'm going to multiply it by A. I write down my base, and I add exponents. So here I've got 2 plus 1 is 3. The only reason I can do it is because of multiplication. A cubed B. Now I'm going to distribute the A squared B to the B squared. So what we're actually doing is A squared B multiplied by negative B squared. And remember, signs, numbers, letters. So a positive multiplied by a negative will give us a negative. I have no more A squared or A, so that's going to be A squared. I have a B there and a B squared, so when I'm multiplying them together, I write down my base. I have 1 plus 2 is 3, so that's negative A squared B. I check to see that they are not like terms. They are not, therefore that is the simplified version of that distribution calculation. Let's look at the next one. It looks like I have 2 brackets, but the only reason I have 2 brackets is because if I didn't have the second bracket, that would look like this, m minus n minus 6. And then, in fact, I would have 2 terms. But I don't have 2 terms. I only have one term, because this means multiply. So that is multiply. And what this is saying to us is that we must distribute the negative 6 to each of the terms inside the bracket. So it looks a little bit different, and you are expected to know that this means negative 6 distributed to the m. So what we are doing here, you can also distribute from the back, not just from the front. So again, we're going to do signs. A negative multiplied by a positive is negative. Numbers, 6 multiplied by 1 is 6, and I only have the m. Right, the next thing, we've got to distribute the negative 6 to the negative n. So a negative multiplied by a negative is positive. 6 times n is 6n. This is a binomial. It's an m term and an n term. I'm adding, so I can only add like terms. We cannot simplify that any further. Let's look at our third example. First thing, remember I said to you, the most important thing is to know how many terms you have. And over here, we actually have 2 terms. This, we can do nothing with the 3, so we are going to deal with this group over here. So let's look what we have to do. So I'm focusing on what is happening here. And remember, just as we had negative a, there was an invisible 1. As soon as we have a bracket with a negative, we have an invisible 1 as well. So what this means is negative 1 is distributed to each term inside that bracket. I can do nothing with the 3. It's as simple as it can be. So we write down 3. I'm now going to distribute the negative 1 to the 3p. So again, I look at my signs, my numbers, and my letters. So a negative multiplied by a positive will give us a negative. Numbers, 1 times 3 is 3, and all I have is a p. Now I'm going to distribute the negative 1 to the positive q. So now I'm going to say a negative multiplied by positive is negative. 1, there's an invisible 1 here as well. 1 times 1 is 1. And all I have is a q. A better way of writing that is 3 minus 3p minus q. It's better to leave out the invisible 1. Let's look at the next example. This is different because now, again, I have 2 terms, but this time I have a 2 in front of the bracket. In fact, I have a negative 2 that must be distributed into that bracket. So I have 2 terms. I'm not going to work with a 5. It is in simplified form already. So 5, now I concentrate on my distribution part of my calculation, and I'm going to distribute negative 2 to each of those terms. So again, I look at the signs, then the numbers, then the letters or the variables. So a negative, and remember we have an invisible 1 there, a negative multiplied by a positive is negative. 2 times 1 is 2, and I have an x. Now I'm going to distribute the 2, the negative 2, to the whole of that term. So I'm going to say a negative multiplied by a positive is negative. 2 multiplied by 3 is 6, and I have a y. Remember, check that there are no like terms. There are no like terms, so that is the final answer. In this one, I have one term, because the minus sign is inside the bracket and the minus sign is inside the bracket. But what do we notice? Let's inspect each of the brackets, and we can see from this one, I can simplify 6 minus 4. I cannot simplify these two because they are not like terms, the variables are different. So I'm going to say 6 minus 4 is 2. And then I've got 2f minus 3g. I could have also written this as 2f minus 3g. They mean exactly the same thing. So here I'm going to distribute my 2 to each of the terms inside. The one outside shakes hands with everybody in the room. And again, I must do signs, numbers, variables, or letters. A positive multiplied by a positive is positive. Right, now I'm going to do my numbers. 2 multiplied by 2 is 4. And all I have is an f. Now I'm going to distribute the 2 to the minus 3g or the negative 3g. I do signs first. So a positive multiplied by a negative is negative. Numbers next. 2 times 3 is 6. And all I have is a g. I check that I have no like terms. I don't, so that is the final answer. Let's look at the last one. This is a bit more complicated. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see how many terms I have. There's my first minus sign, but it's inside a bracket, so this is one term, and this term is multiplied to negative 3a squared. So this, in fact, is one term, and this is a second term. So here I have a binomial, and I'm going to look at each of those circles, and I'm going to distribute the one outside to everybody inside the bracket. So for this one, I'm going to go, and again, I must look at the signs, numbers, letters, or variables. So my signs here, a negative multiplied by a positive is negative. Numbers, 3 multiplied by 5 is 15. And I have an a squared, no other a's in that term, so it's a squared. I now distribute 3a squared, negative 3a squared, to a. I do my signs first, signs. A negative multiplied by a negative is negative. Remember the invisible 1 here. So 3 multiplied by 1 is 3. A squared multiplied by a. When I multiply powers with the same base, I write down the base and I add exponents. So 2 plus 1 is 3. This has been simplified to negative 15a squared minus a cubed. Now I'm going to look at this circle here. Remember, we have a negative 1 there. So I'm going to distribute negative 1 to each of the terms inside the bracket. So negative 1, so the first thing I'm going to look at are my signs. A negative multiplied by a positive is negative. 1 times a is a. Now I'm going to do my signs for the next term. A negative multiplied by a positive is negative. 1 times 1 is 1. That is my answer. I do not have any like terms because this is a squared, a cubed. This is a to the power of 1. and I have a constant term. So that is my simplification of that expression. That is all for today. Please go and do exercise 6.4.